200, sir.
It is. It is time.
Okay. All right. Double B.
No, I haven't asked for comment.
Yeah. It's like a fan club. Waiting for those.
I would give you a key to my office.
I don't think there's a lock on the men's room.
That was weird.
Think about that for a second.
He said he wouldn't give him the key to his office, and I said, I don't think there's a lock on the men's room. So I was trying to say, okay.
All right, fellow board members and part of our community. We do have some people climbing on the line, just so you know. There's people getting on right now. Thank you to OCTV for doing this for us again throughout this process. Let's rise. The flag's right there for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Again, welcome everyone. The first of two second interviews for superintendent. Mary, would you do attendance, please?
I shall. President Donnelly.
Here.
Vice President Griffith.
Here.
Secretary Hanser, present. Treasurer Bailey.
Here.
Trustee D'Alessandro.
Here.
Trustee Foster.
Here.
Trustee Shaver. Here.
All right, very good. I don't have any changes to the board agenda. Angela already put in 3B for us to discuss. So we move on to the finalist interview. Mr. Pass, thank you for being with us today. So good evening, and on behalf of the Board of Education of Oxford Community Schools, I'd like to welcome David Pass back for this second round of interviews. Mr. Pass is the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources for Oxford Community Schools. Take just a minute, like I did last time, to kind of talk about the layout of this process. The interview will take up to 80 minutes. It will begin with a presentation on the topic provided by the board. Following your presentation, we've developed 14 questions that you will be asked. Toward the end of the interview, time permitting, like last time, we'll give you an opportunity to ask the board some questions, if you have any, and make a closing remark. We will indicate if time is becoming an issue. John has his cards and he shows them to me, and I get to see that process. To the audience feedback may be submitted on the form provided for this purpose. So let's talk about that for a second. There's some people coming in. If you pass by a long, narrow table, there are some agendas there. There are some forms that you would want to be filling out during the process. And there are some pens there if you need. And also, if you're here for unscheduled audience participation, there's a card there that you would be giving to Angela so that we can address those issues as well. Although the task of choosing our next superintendent is the responsibility of the Board of Education, as the elected representatives of our community, we value and consider the input of our stakeholders in this process. So, Mr. Pass, you may begin with your presentation on the following topic. Present your plan for your first 90 days as Oxford Schools Superintendent, providing as much detail as possible and being explicit about what your actions are designed to accomplish, both in short term and long term. Thank you.
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to thank the board for the opportunity to be with you here tonight. I'm humbled and honored to be considered for this. This is truly special, and so I certainly don't take that for granted. I know what a difficult decision this is for the board. also like to thank my wife Teresa and Zachary for coming out tonight and supporting me. So with that, I will we'll get into the 90-day plan, and towards the end of this, I have some information I'm going to talk about in terms of long-range vision for the district. First and foremost, as I mentioned in my my first interview, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't start with points of pride. All the great things that we have going on in this district. Whether it's our early childhood center with the infant toddler programs, our Oxford Virtual Academy, the breadth of our CTE programs, after school activities, athletics. There are so many things here that we should be proud of. That are just amazing. Making Oxford the amazing district that it has been. So a little introduction to the plan I'm going to share with the board this evening. This plan focuses on immediate actions along with some of the long-term areas of focus. And I hope that you'll see throughout this that there is a commitment to all students. That is core to who I am and how I've served in education. And everything I do is about every child, every day. And then also that the guiding force is really leaning on our strategic plan and our portrait of a graduate that will guide our priorities. And lastly, that Oxford's values are really at the core of what we do. And I believe that the values that I hold near and dear to myself are aligned very well with the values that this district holds as well. So to give you a little bit of an oversight, you probably saw this in my 90-day plan. I have 6 different goal areas, and these goal areas will be both short and long-term. And so what you'll see in the initial phases of this presentation is really geared towards what that's going to look like in the first 90 days. And when I say first 90 days, I'm really talking about, from the point would be you're starting as your next superintendent through the rest of the school year. That's really the time period we're talking about. So we've got social, emotional well-being of stakeholders, relationships and trust, student engagement, board governance, organizational alignment, and community and public relations. So the first area, and I would tell you with most of these, I would say that they're not in any particular order, but this one is number 1 for a reason. We have an intense need to focus on the social, emotional well-being of all of our stakeholders. When I say all of it, I'm talking students, community, teachers, and employees in this district. One of the first areas, and these are the overarching goal areas. We've got the employee wellness program. We are in the process right now of working with our Gallagher benefits consultant and focusing on employee wellness and what we can do to enhance that for our employees. We know that is a critical need right now, something that we had focused on actually prior to the tragedy, certainly compounded during these times. Social emotional supports for students. We're going to be looking at a social emotional learning curriculum, access to family school liaison supports. Recently we partnered with Honor Health for having a local clinic available on the campus, as well as our partnership with Easter Seals. And then school engagement is an area of focus. So how do we get students engaged in our schools and our offerings and building those relationships with adults. And then ultimately to evaluate our capacity to meet those student needs. And so as we continue to this slide, this is really about, what are these actionable items that you're going to see in the first 90 days as it relates to social emotional well-being of all stakeholders. First and foremost, we need to expand access to our family school liaisons at the elementary level. Right now we have 4 of our elementary buildings that share a family school liaison between those buildings. I think it's critically important that with everything going on now and the increased demands that we have access to family school liaisons at all times in all of our buildings. We need to evaluate our counselor-student ratio at the secondary level. Clearly we're way over where the state would recommend that we're at, and that's not an indictment on Oxford. That is very common across the county. It's certainly an area that we need to focus on, and it's certainly an area that I'm happy that the state is beginning to focus on this as well. We are in the process of developing a wellness director position, and as soon as this process is complete, we're planning to move forward with getting that position posted and filled. Developing that community partnership with Honor Health and Easter Seals, and so we need to continue that work of building that out and being ready for full implementation as soon as possible. And then we need to begin research on social emotional learning curriculums that might be available. So we need to begin to dig into that idea and find something that we might be able to implement. And then lastly, securing additional funding for new positions. You know, as I mentioned before, you know, we do have some grant funds available, and we need to secure those funds for some of these additional positions, and certainly continue to advocate with our legislature over permanent funding for these. Goal number 2 is focused on relationships and trust. And this goal area is engaging students, parents, community members, and staff that's being available, accessible, and meeting with these folks. Developing relationships with local businesses and civic leaders. Continuing open communication with the union leadership. You know, I'm proud of our relationships with the unions in the district, and we're going to continue to work with them. And as the board is aware, we're working on successor contracts as we speak. So we'll certainly continue that. And then, I think maybe even most importantly, establish and enhance systems for communication with all of our stakeholders. You know, I think that one of the areas that has come to light certainly over the last couple of months is, I put that there intentionally, is two-way communication. We've got to maintain engagement with our folks. It can't be one-sided information, emailing, you know, getting feedbacks. We've got to engage regularly with all segments of our community and our stakeholders. So again, some of the action steps that you will see in the next 90 days, certainly continuing that negotiation process with all the collective bargaining groups, visiting district and community events. That is going to be very important for me. I want to be able to build those relationships, and you know, part of the ways I'm going to do that is be in district events, be in buildings, and developing that networking relationship with our community and different groups. We're going to hold meetings with all the stakeholder groups. This is key over the next 90 days, and I want to meet with, you know, one of the first things that I'm going to do is wanting to meet with each of the board members, have a conversation, and get to know each of you on a different level, and understand what your expectations are for me as your next superintendent if I were selected. The district administrators, staff, community members, and students, I'll continue meeting with all of those groups, and I think it's important for the board to understand that my goal is to meet with anybody and everybody that wants to meet. Not sure how I'm going to fit that in the calendar, but we're going to find a way. It is important that everybody has an opportunity to be heard and engage in some conversations. And so I'm going to make myself available to anybody and everybody that needs to have those conversations. And if that extends beyond 90 days in order to make that happen, then we will make it as long as we need to. And so those opportunities are available for folks. And then another big area for me in relationships and trust, and one of the areas that I talked about with our students today, was beginning a process to develop a student advisory group that I would imagine would encompass some of our middle school students as well as you know, hopefully a broad section of high school students in the building, so that we can listen to them and also empower them in the decision-making process. I think that is going to be pivotal. Goal number 3, student achievement. Not a lot of bullets here, but a lot of depth in what this means. And part of that is gaining a deeper understanding of our student achievement data, looking at that both locally as well as some of our state assessment data, looking at our instructional and assessment practices across the district, and then looking at how we deliver professional learning and whether or not that's effective. And then how do our current practices then align with our strategic plan? You know, that is something we're going to need to look at. You know, the strategic plan was developed pre-pandemic. We all recognize that a lot has happened over the last 2 years, and you know, we're going to need to revisit that. You know, there are a lot of changes that may be necessary to that plan. And then identify opportunities for growth. So again, action steps that you will see from me in the next 90 days, reviewing our district improvement plans and student data across the system. And again, that's looking at our local assessment data as well as MSTEP. MSTEP will be a bit of a challenge in that, you know, during the pandemic, I don't know that we've got, you know, really valid data, but we can certainly go back to 18-19 to look at, you know, some of the system information that it might provide for us. Begin a regular system of building and classroom visits. That was one of the things that I talked about a lot today during the stakeholder visits, was being visible and finding opportunities to be in classrooms intentionally, building those connections, and not just from a standpoint of being visible, but really understanding what's happening day to day in our classrooms, developing those relationships, and creating, you know, open communication, finding ways to be able to communicate regularly with our stakeholders in the district. And then continue to build an environment that enables and supports academic, social, and emotional needs of all of our stakeholders. Goal 4, board governance, and that's a good-looking group of people up there, so great picture. The biggest thing here is certainly cultivating a positive working relationship with each Board of Education member. And that also means developing a system of communication. I think that's going to be an initial step that we need to take in working together to talk about the type of communication, the kind of information that we want to exchange. But the core principles of that, for me, are honesty, transparency, being detailed in the information that I might provide for the board, being consistent in regards to that communication, and then making sure that all board members are informed. And that means that if particular board members might have questions, that we make sure that the whole board is informed of what's happening. And then further establish the Board of Education and the superintendent as a cohesive team. And it will be fundamental that we function as a team of 8. That we're a team and we all have the best interests at heart, and we're going to function in that manner. So again, action steps to meet those goals. Conduct a Board of Education retreat to create a shared understanding of roles and establish a communication system. That would be something that I would look to do certainly in the first 30 days. And then collaborate with the Board of Education and district leadership to discuss the progress and reinforce priorities as we go through those 90 days. Make sure that I'm keeping the board informed in terms of what I'm hearing, where we're at. But ultimately, we'll certainly have an executive summary at the end of this process as well. And then meet individually with each board member. It would be a priority that I think week 1, we begin those meetings and having those conversations. Organizational alignment. Goal 5, first is evaluate strategic alignment. And when I say strategic alignment, we're talking about portrait of a graduate, a strategic plan, professional learning, instructional and assessment practices to make sure that there's coherence among all those different elements so that we know that we're all rowing in the same direction towards the same goals. That our assessment practices align with our curriculum, that aligns with our strategic plan and what we say we're doing in our strategic plan, so to make sure that everything is in alignment. Want to review our current communication and decision-making processes. Communication is something that you'll probably hear over and over. That is something that we certainly need to enhance and make sure that we're very intentional about how we communicate, not just with the board, but also with all of our stakeholders. And then lastly, prioritizing professional learning for our district leaders. Action steps here. This is a unique time of year to be making this transition. Maybe less unique these days than in the past, but we're transitioning the superintendency prior to the end of the school year. And so we'll need to wrap up the end of the school year, and that means we're scheduling kids, we're determining staffing needs, and beginning planning for next year, as well as closing up the school year and thinking about graduation and end of year activities. I want to meet with district partners, which might include construction management, architects, bond consultants, local partnerships, Oakland County Health, a lot of these other partnerships that we already have in existence. And then work with our instructional leadership team to determine long-term goals. And then last, community and public relations is to evaluate our current communication tools and recommend additional opportunities to communicate with our constituent groups, and that means everybody. That's our parents, our teachers, administrators, and district staff. And to be clear, I'm not just talking about communication that the district sends out on a regular basis, but what do our communications look like within our buildings, among our staff, and how do we, are there any gaps there that exist that we need to look at and close in terms of our communication? I want to enhance the current positive relationships and seek new community partnerships. As I mentioned before, we've got an amazing community and so many great businesses and even nonprofit agencies that are there and ready to support us. And I want to make sure I'm meeting with those folks and enhancing those relationships. And then establishing positive relationships with representatives of the media. So some action steps here is initial key contact with individuals, meeting with community members, legislators, key media sources, attending municipality meetings to introduce myself to see how we can partner with those groups, and further develop that network with superintendents to enhance and establish mutually beneficial relationships. And one of the things I would say is, throughout my experience, having worked in 3 other school districts, it's afforded me the opportunity to build a pretty robust network of resources and some amazing educators across the county. And certainly those are folks I will tap into to share ideas and make sure that we're doing the best to serve our students. And then lastly, I want to begin attending building PTO and other community meetings to introduce myself, and then offer opportunities for additional feedback or individual meetings. So the results of the 90-day plan, hopefully what you took from that is that I want to be visible and present. I want to be in our buildings. I want to be having meetings with folks, and it's really about listening and learning. And I put here, this was a protocol that I've used in the past, and it doesn't necessarily need to be 3-2-1, but the idea of these conversations is really guided on what are the things that we do really well, and then what are the things that we might be able to improve upon. And sometimes this third one is one that we don't give enough credit to, is thinking about what are the things we need to stop doing, because I think we're notorious in our profession that it's, here's another thing and another thing and another thing. I think at times we need to take a deep dive at what we're doing and what's effective, and so that if we're talking about adding a social emotional learning curriculum, are there other things that we need to look at that we might need to stop doing that aren't effective? So I think that's an important lens we need to look through. And then ultimately I want to evaluate that feedback from all of the stakeholder groups. Ultimately, I want to come back to the board in July with an executive summary where you're going to hear from me what were my observations, over these first 90 days. And this won't be the first time you hear it. I'll give you updates along the way. What was the feedback from the stakeholder meetings? Are there tentative timelines that might be in place in terms of action steps that we might want to make? What are the implications of our strategic plan? I would anticipate I'm going to hear some things that may guide us in a different direction to revisit that strategic plan and maybe prioritize some other areas. And so I'm going to be listening for that and then evaluating that alignment. And then ultimately all of these things are going to guide my direction as your next superintendent in terms of my professional goals and my evaluation. So that's really the focus on the immediacy of where I see the next 90 days or the end of this school year going in terms of my action steps. I want to talk a little bit about moving beyond 90 days. And this isn't aligned the same way in terms of the goals, but I want to share with the board, I think, some of the things that are on the forefront of my mind when I think about, moving forward, what are some of the things that we need to think about. This first slide here represents the years of experience of our teaching staff in this district. And I think one of the things that stands out to me is that, we have 40% of our teachers that are in their first 5 years. And not too long ago, one of our teachers presented at a board meeting to talk about some of that, right? To talk about some of the turnover that we're experiencing in the teaching field, or our ability to be able to retain good people, quality teachers in the district. We need to focus intently on supporting those teachers in their first 5 years. We're going to be working with the union and bargaining to be able to pay teachers who are going to be mentors so that we can develop some more explicit supports for our teachers. That's going to be critical. Another area here is certainly compensation. That is a way that we show value to our employees, is making sure that we're supporting them financially. And so we're in bargaining right now. But we've got to find ways to support and retain the people that we have. Another area that I want to point out, I think this is both a celebration and an opportunity, and I'm not going to go into deep dive in all of the data, but just share with you a couple things that kind of stood out to me. And so when I look at this graph, this is a comparison of our MSTEP scores for 5th grade students and then that same group of kids when they took the MSTEP again in 7th grade. So we're looking at the same students, and you can see we look at a lot of our comparable districts here. And I think this tells a story about the pandemic and missed opportunities. You can see in all of the districts, with the exception really of Oxford, who was one of the only districts who was in session during that time, that we saw relatively stable scores in the area of language arts. So I think that's a celebration of what in-person learning did for us and how that impacted our students. But when I go to the next slide, I would just want to kind of look at this from a different lens. This slide here is our English language arts average, and what you can see in this chart, and the only reason I'm showing you this is Oxford's in the middle of the pack. When we look at some of our neighboring districts like Clarkston, Lake Orion, Rochester, they're outperforming us in some of these areas. And I would tell you, when I look at our staff, our teachers, and our support staff, I know we can do better. And I think we need to be thinking about that. You know, the M-STEP is not the end all be all, but it does give us some benchmarks to be able to look at. And I think this is a benchmark that says, you know, we've got opportunities, you know, that we can look at. And I think we can get to through a coherent lens of how we do our work. You know, it's not about who we have. We've got great people. Professional learning, certainly need to have an intense focus on professional learning, and I think one of the things that stands out to me the most is really investing in our instructional leadership teams, our administrators across the district. You know, our administrators right now, they're managing a lot of their buildings, and it runs beyond just being an instructional leader. There's so many more supports, and so we need to focus as a leadership team about providing professional development opportunities, and I mean internally, where we're you know, looking at literature and other things where we can learn from each other and grow so that they can help support their teachers and staff in their buildings. Professional learning communities, you've probably heard that term before, and we have, we call them PLC leaders. And so we have content area experts that lead our areas at the secondary level in each of their core content areas, where those groups are beginning to have conversations with their departments around, you know, what are our kids, what do we expect our kids to learn, how are they doing, how do we know when they're learning it, and then looking at that last goal of what do we do when they aren't. And I would tell you that in all my time in education, one of the trickiest questions there, we're data rich, we've got all kinds of data. We need to look at first finishing our common assessment systems at the secondary level. Those are all not complete yet, and that is a good measure for us to be able to have collaborative conversations amongst teachers about where our kids are, you know, how our kids are performing. But the most important thing is once we have that data, what are we doing with it? You know, how are we utilizing that data to inform our practice every day? And that really comes down to building relationships, breaking down those barriers so that teachers can have authentic conversations with each other. Because there's a vulnerability that comes along with, you know, acknowledging that maybe my kids in my class didn't perform as better as someone else's, and really being able to open up and have meaningful conversations about why, you know, what might we able to look at differently. And so, you know, creating those relationships so people can be vulnerable, that's how we're going to grow. And then lastly, in professional learning, if we're adopting the social emotional learning curriculum, we're going to need to look at, you know, the appropriate staff that we're going to need to train. Stakeholder engagement, this is, you know, absolutely critical for me, certainly in the next 90 days and into the future. And a few ideas here is that, you know, building visits for our cabinet level team. You know, we started that when I first came to the district, where we started holding our cabinet level meetings at the building levels to create some, you know, unique opportunities for our cabinet teams to get into classrooms and visit with staff. The pandemic shut some of that down. I want to revisit some of that and certainly set some expectations that, you know, some of our cabinet members, when we talk about our instructional folks like Ken and Anita, there's certainly natural opportunities for them to connect in the building, but maybe not so much for even, you know, in my current role or, you know, for business or even student services. So, you know, having some intentionality about getting into those buildings and connecting with what's happening. I'd like to develop a PTO President's Council, and so that would mean meeting quarterly with our PTO presidents from across the district to stay engaged with those groups and understand from a parent perspective what's happening in those buildings. Coffee with the community. I know that's something that Mr. Throne does right now. I'm not sure he names it Coffee with the Community, but I love coffee, so it sounds good to me. But just a way to, you know, have kind of an open house forum where community members can come in and we can just have some open dialogue. Breakfast with the Board of Education. I thought this was an idea that was intriguing to me, and it's, you know, inviting the board to the high school to meet with select groups of students, perhaps meet with, you know, individual groups and have board members kind of rotate through to kind of get a flavor of where our kids are at, what their thinking is. Really about just ways for us to engage together. Again, I mentioned already the Superintendent Student Advisory Group. That's something that I would want to get in place this spring and implement in the fall. And then student representative on the Board of Education. I think it'd be great to have a selected student from the high school to participate on the board, to be able to give an update from the high school, you know, at our board meetings, to really connect us and give them some leadership opportunities. And then importantly, you know, attending community events. You know, I think the board's aware, you know, that I don't live in the community, and, you know, we live in Rochester, my kids go to Rochester schools, and I want to be very intentional about investing in this community. You investing in our events and athletics and being accessible. I think that having those conversations and building those relationships with our community, this is where I want to spend my time and invest in. That is really important to me. Capital needs and facilities assessments, although not glamorous, not as glamorous as talking about kids, but certainly a reality. You know, we need to talk about our facilities and what our needs are. You know, we last did a facilities assessment with Tony Sarkins prior to the 2017 bond, prior to my time here. We need to revisit that, and I think that we need to look at maybe a more comprehensive district-wide, perhaps, you know, either a bid or having Clark Construction or IDS come in and assist, so that we can look at things more long-term to figure out, you know, what are going to be our pressure points in the future in terms of capital needs, whether that's, you know, roofing, interiors, exteriors, electrical, HVAC, you know, to have a good understanding of our system of what's the lifespan of different things. You know, that is going to inform us, you know, where there's going to be some potential that we might need to go out to our community in terms of looking at a bond versus our ability to be able to, you know, budget for those internally through our capital project fund. So it's something that we're going to need to be keenly focused on. And then also our Drainer Road property, you know, having just purchased that amazing property, I know that we had planned to utilize that front building. We're talking about that being the house, a resiliency center. But the main facility, we're going to have to determine our usage, what our vision is for that facility, and then we're going to have to build that out and then determine whether or not we have the funding necessary to do that, or that's going to be a future bond project. So certainly a lot to think about in that area. And then lastly, social and emotional well-being of all stakeholders. We need to evaluate our resources and structural needs for this. And so, you know, I'm going to be listening and learning over the next 90 days, but then we're going to have to look at this from a system lens. Are we staffed appropriately to meet the needs of our kids? You know, certainly having a wellness director will help in that area to develop some coherence and help identify our needs, but, you know, we're going to need to keep a pulse on this moving forward to make sure that we've got the systems and the people in place to do that work. And then, as I mentioned, developing that structure with the wellness director being a new position, we're going to need to work on that. You know, I think with some key areas of ensuring meaningful connections for every student, having clinical supports in place as well as mental health supports. And then lastly, as I already mentioned, you know, looking at enhancing employee wellness. That is an area of great concern for me. I've seen the struggle, and I heard some of it today through the stakeholder visits, and certainly an area that we need to help our folks. I don't have all the answers in that area, but I think we need to dig in to figure out how we can best support our people moving forward. So that is my presentation, and I'll leave you with a quote that I had in my 90-day plan. This is really about, you know, every day in every classroom in every school, we expect that all students will be met by the highest quality teachers who utilize the best instructional practice, who will hold all students to the highest standard. I think that's a core expectation that I would bring if I were your next superintendent. So, thank you.
David, thank you. By the way, David, would you like a bottle of water or anything?
I just said that would be great.
I mean, let's
Lots
just
talking today.
take just a minute, let you have some water, and we're going to transition to the questions. But let's let you take just a moment.
Thank you. Is this okay? Volume okay?
Yeah, for us it is. You're good? Okay.
Rumors already shifted to, all right, looks like we're ready.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, very good. Thank you for that presentation, by the way. First question. Mr. Pass, since deciding to become a candidate and participating in the search process, what in that process has reinforced your aspiration to be our next superintendent?
So this has been amazing. As I mentioned before, it's been an honor to be here, and I would tell you that you know, meeting today with all of our stakeholder groups it's been the highlight so far. You know, I've really enjoyed those conversations. You know, some difficult questions. I will tell you, the students take the prize today. they had the best questions. Not to diminish the rest, but they were absolutely amazing in some of their questions. I see Angela nodding. Yes, I'm going to hire someone part-time in human resource to help develop our interview questions. But their commitment and the pride that folks have in this community is absolutely incredible. I mean, those kids are brilliant, and you know that is one of the things that I've said as I think about my aspirations to be your next superintendent. I love what I do. You know, I've been very blessed in my career, and I miss the connection with kids. I really do. You know, that is something that gave me great joy. You know, when I was an elementary principal, and you're able to see the direct impact of what you do every single day. You see it on their faces. You see it happening in the classrooms. Like, that is real, you know, and tangible for me. And to be able to sit down with the kids today and engage in those conversations, it was just incredible. You know, I mean, it was kind of a lens into, you know, I think some hope for me that I'm selected as your next superintendent to really engage with kids on a deeper level. You know, these kids are amazing. You know, when I talk about, you know, developing a student advisory council, I mean, there's so many opportunities that we can give these kids to be decision makers and engage them in day to day in what we do. And I saw that today. I heard that, you know, in the questions that they asked. At some point, I'll share with you some of them, but they're really, really insightful. You know, and then even meeting with our parent groups and just, you know, just the passion, you know, that they have, and that's. It's great to see that, you know, great to see that kind of investment. So I was all in before this, and I'm all in now. Like it's been an incredible journey that's just reinforced my aspirations to want to be your next superintendent. So thank you,
David. Thank you, Mary.
Mr. Pass, when you have an administrative team that may have differences of opinion among its members, how do you reconcile those differences and get everyone moving in the same direction?
I think that you know, I mean, we're doing that. We're engaged in those conversations now. You know, there are a lot of times that we don't necessarily agree, and I would tell you that throughout my career, that has been, you know, that's just been a part of leadership for me. Whether it's, you know, leading initiatives at the building level or change process, or, you know, whether we're engaged in collective bargaining. You know, there are divergent opinions and differences. And I've said it before, and I'll probably start sounding like a broken record, but at least you'll know kind of what my belief system is. Relationships are key. We have to have these relationships. We have to build trust. You know, all of that happens through, you know, ongoing and regular communication. And we need to focus on issues. You know, that's the important thing. It's not about you know, individual differences and people's opinions. It's taking all that information and boiling that down to what are the most important issues for us. You know, it's the same thing that happens when we, you know, you talk about collective bargaining. You say, you know, when it comes down to it, you start talking about common interests. There's way more common interests than there are differences. You know, yes, we mutually want to support our employees the best way we can. You know, we mutually want to do, you know, so many of these, you know, amazing things. Sometimes, you know, we get caught up in the nuances of how do we do that. But I think when you understand our why, you know, why we do what we do, and who we want to do that for, it moves us away from having conversations about differences of opinions and focuses those on, okay, how can we take this information, you know, because I truly believe that these divergent opinions make us better. I think that's how we learn from one another. But then boil that down to, okay, we all want to support kids. You know, this is all about doing what's best for kids. And when we look at it through the issues and not the people, you know, it helps us come to you know, great solutions. And so I think it's just, you know, having the right relationships, being open-minded, listening to each other, understanding, you know, seeking to understand each other, and then moving forward in the best direction. You know, and as I talked about, like even with the Board of Education, you know, having a team of 8, we're going to have differences of opinions on things, you know, and divergent opinions, but you know, we'll come together in the right way around the issues and support those decisions as a team. So I think that I've got a lot of examples throughout my career that's just been a regular part of my leadership, and we've got an amazing team in central office. And as you know full well, you know, 3 of us sat in front of you, and so you got to see that on full display. And it's amazing that we've got that kind of capacity on our team. And so I know we can do great things together.
My turn.
All right.
What is your vision for where would you like to see us in a year? So it would be the end of a whole nother school year, which is another unique spot.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there are a few things that come to mind. You know, and first and foremost, I think culture probably needs to be at the forefront of our conversation. We need to make sure that we support our people, we support our kids, that this is a place that people want to be. You know, and I know right now, you know, those are challenging times. And I'm confident that we'll work through that, but we need to keep that, I think, as a conscious element of enhancing and supporting the culture in the organization. And I think that when I say culture, I'm talking about a few things. Again, I'm talking about, relationships, making sure that I'm having conversations, our team is having conversations with the right people. We understand the issues and the concerns that we have, in developing trust. And part of that trust is maintaining open and honest communications. I shared a story earlier today when I was first into my first building principalship, and we were having a leadership team meeting in our buildings. I quickly here I come into this meeting thinking I'm going to share some ideas. Like, I've got some ideas, I'm going to talk with this group, and we're going to share some ideas, and quickly realized that when I shared my ideas, I silenced the room. Because they saw me in a different light. Well, he's our building leader. If that's his idea, that must be the idea that we want to move forward with. So they didn't want to challenge that. When really, what I wanted people to say is, that's a bad idea. I got a better idea, because I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. And so I quickly learned that you need to create opportunities for people to engage. If I'm visiting a classroom in the high school, is a teacher going to feel comfortable telling me about how bad their day's been, or the challenges they've experienced over the last few weeks? I need to be cognizant that might not be an easy thing for people to do, and so I may have to engage those conversations in the right way. So I'm eliciting that information. I'm providing opportunities to hear what I need to hear, and so I think that comes down to that culture. Understanding that I want to listen. I want to help. I want to understand. I want to move the district forward in a positive direction. So I think that's one. I think another key area certainly is, we're an academic institution, and we can't lose sight of that through all of this. We need to look at what we're doing from an academic standpoint, from an instructional standpoint. And so, part of my 90-day plan, certainly having served in human resources, I need to dig deeper into those curricular areas, and look at our student data as a system. I'm certainly cognizant of much of it, but I haven't dug, deeply into, looking at our content expectations or our grade level assessments to see where our kids are at. That's going to be a part of, my next 90 days, is to be able to look at that, to see where we're at as a system. So that can inform some of the conversations that we're having. That can inform the work that we're doing in our professional learning community groups. And so, while we're still, managing and enhancing culture in the district, we need to also move the district forward in these other areas. So I think those need to be, mutually, beneficial areas that we focus on.
I'm next. Understanding that standardized tests do not tell the whole story of student growth or success, what specific measures should be in place to determine the success of an Oxford student?
So I want to tackle this from two lenses. One is from the academic side, and then the other is our dispositions that we want our students to graduate with. And I'm speaking specifically, to that portrait of a graduate. As we've, I think, discussed as a board before, when future employers are looking for graduates to come join their engineering firm or whatever, they're not saying, oh, he got an A in the engineering class, let's hire him. They're looking for students that have demonstrated perseverance and problem solving, and they're empathetic, and all of these kinds of soft skills. They're problem solvers that are helping our kids be successful in the workforce. And so that is certainly a significant area that we can't lose sight of, is those qualities that we've outlined in our Forge for the Graduate that I think does an amazing job of outlining all of those. And then the other part is certainly the academic side. I don't want to minimize the importance of that. These are both important areas. And so, standardized assessments, as we talked about before, provide a lens into some of the information, some good comparables, or how we might be missing or doing well in certain areas of our curriculum delivery. They don't inform what happens every day. It is not timely information. And so if we want to make a difference with kids every day, we need to be looking at, formative assessment data, and some of that is, that looks a lot of different ways. That's teachers doing formative assessments on a daily basis, whether it's, checkouts or information, looking at some of the assignments and work that kids are doing to constantly gauge where their kids are at and whether they're learning. I think on a formative basis also, we have our own common assessments. And so while we don't have those built out in all of the content areas yet, we've made good progress. And I think that is a key area to look across our departments to see how our kids are performing. Because that's an opportunity for collaboration amongst teachers. And as I mentioned before, we need to create those relationships, the trust, that vulnerability, so that teachers can have some conversations about how one teacher's classroom is performing on these standard assessments to another, so they can have real conversations about what are you doing differently. What does that look like in your classroom? How did you engage the kids around this topic? That your students are doing differently. And I would tell you from my experience and having done instructional rounds and observed teachers, sometimes the teachers don't understand all of the nuances that happen. Sometimes it's, some of my kids were absent and missed school, and other kids that are not engaged, and sometimes it comes down to how they're engaging the kids in those lessons, how they empower kids, how they question kids, and so really getting to some of those deeper elements of what that instruction really looks like on a daily basis in order to move those areas forward. But I think it comes down to both of those areas, right? Dispositions and academics needs to be local and formative.
Ready, aren't you?
I might need a drink of water. Go ahead. Thank you.
David, competition in public schools in the form of private schools, choice of another public school, charter schools, and virtual programs, they're all increasing. How, in your opinion, can Oxford schools remain the first choice of our resident families with these increasing external pressures?
I want to oversimplify it, but this is not a simple answer. I think the concise version would say, do it better than everybody else. But what does that look like? I think that Oxford has been, continues to be a destination district. We talked about some things already. We look at academic achievement. That's an area that we need to focus on. We have done an amazing job over the last 10 years in being innovative in our practices and creating opportunities that exist in Oxford that don't exist anywhere else. I think that was exemplified throughout the pandemic. There were many districts that attempted to develop virtual programs, and I would still tell you that we do it better than most. And we're constantly getting calls and people want to consult with us about how we do it, and that team at OVA has done an amazing job. And so, but there's certainly opportunities for improvement. I think that we need to look at where these gaps might exist. Whether it's academically or culturally. Those are certainly factors of people wanting to be in the district and attend the district. We know that kids are enrolled here for a variety of reasons. We have robust career technical education programs, more than anybody around us. We have, focused on our athletics, and as I opened in my presentation, the vast amount of athletic opportunities available for our kids. And by the way, for free, we've never charged our kids for that. That doesn't happen in most other places. Our arts programs and our investment in the arts, there are so many things that we do really well. But again, we can't be complacent. We need to, I think, always be able to challenge the status quo where we're at and look at, how we can improve in these areas. But, it really does boil down to having the best options, right? Doing the best job in those areas. And, I would put our folks up against anybody that we can be the best, in this community. And there's so many things that we are already.
Okay, this one's a three-part question. What do you see as being the short and long-term physical needs of the district? How will you get input from stakeholders on what they believe our facilities and infrastructure needs are? And how will you prioritize those needs?
I think I got it. Maybe I'll ask you to repeat. Let's see. So short and long-term physical needs. I mentioned, a bit obviously in my presentation about capital needs, and we need to do some assessments. So, I think first and foremost, when we talk about, kind of the day-to-day, facilities and maybe some of the less glamorous items we need to look at, I think we need to do a facilities assessment to determine where we're at, right? What's the lifespan of some of our boilers or, heating and cooling units, to get an idea of where those needs are at. That might inform, both short and long term, and of course, future bond needs. I think we recognize a couple of opportunities, right? We purchased the Drainer Road property. We've had some initial conversations about what that might look like. I think, we talk about stakeholder input, we certainly need to engage our community around that. When we start talking about some of the bigger items we might want to look at, when we talk about a future bond, there's certainly things that we've discussed, I think, at this level, whether, there's a indoor athletic facility, or whether there's an early childhood center, or whether there's a need to want to relocate bridges, and do some building that way, and where's the best location to be able to do those things. We've got property adjacent to the high school now, that is being cleared and balanced and is going to be ready. And what's our vision for that? And so, I think those are conversations that we need to start at the board level to be able to have some conceptual ideas of where we're at, what future bonds might look like, what may be available to us in the future, and then going out to our stakeholders. And we talk about stakeholders. I think there's a lot of ways to do that. I think certainly formally through inviting community members in to have these conversations. But these are community facilities, and so we need our community investment. They're our voters. They're the ones that are going to approve where this money goes. And so, we need to identify, what is the greatest need, what are interests in the community, and how can we meet those needs. I would tell you that I think part of the way we get that input, when I talk about being visible and attending events, I think that's where a lot of these conversations are going to happen. Whether you're at a football game or basketball game or musical or wherever else, and hopefully I'm building these relationships where I can have some conversations, to gauge where our community might be at, where these interests are at, and certainly the board will have some insight as well as as community members and the network and information that you all receive. So I think those are some ways that we get the stakeholder input, and then to prioritize. Again, I think that's something that we need to do with stakeholder groups and as a district. I think there's going to be certain priorities that we need to look at, that things need to function, right? We have to have heating and cooling. We have to have facilities that function and work. We have to have technology that is up to date. So we've got to look at the lifespan of our technology. And so I would say a lot of those things are going to be a priority in the year to year, to make sure that those things are taken care of. And then we need to figure out where these bigger items are, what are the priorities of our community members in terms of what they want to see, where the opportunities for growth are, and then weave that into some of the other, maybe more immediate, smaller kind of capital needs. So, did I catch all three parts?
All three.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Aside from full-time overprogramming, we've seen great value from work invested into our virtual capabilities. What opportunities do you see to enhance over programming as well as enhancing learning flexibility for our seated students?
So I think a couple of things, come to mind when I think about OVA programming. We are, right now, OVA's got a breadth of opportunities for our students, and some of the unique ones are some of the partnerships with local businesses. I think we've got about 14 different businesses in the community that some of our kids take programs with, whether it's sports or cooking or music. We've got a lot of different partnerships, and so I think that there are opportunities to expand those partnerships and opportunities, and can even look in other fields, whether it's looking at skilled trades or some other things in the area, and partnering with other local businesses. I know Janet is excited about some of those opportunities. We're also focused on developing competency-based units at OVA, and so I think that is going to be a unique opportunity, and certainly more cutting edge in public education right now. Which really moves away from this kind of a seat time and kind of start to finish. It's more competency-based, where you're looking at a unit of study, and kids go through that unit at their own pace and their own time, and then once they finish, they'll start in another competency-based program. So it's really kind of focuses in on that, anytime, any place, at your own pace kind of philosophy. So I think those are a couple of different areas. And when I think about OVA programming, I can't help but think, through my doctoral program, my capstone project, I focused on looking at elementary reading at OVA. And so what I was attempting to do, through the pandemic, because we had a number of kids that shifted from our seated world over to virtual setting during that year, created a unique opportunity to be able to look at how our kids were performing in OVA compared to our seated buildings. It was an interesting study that I won't bore you with all the details right now. If you're excited about it, I can do that another time. But ultimately, the study didn't lead me where I thought it was going to. I thought I was going to be able to assess how those programs met the needs of our kids, and ultimately learn that the way that we are assessing our kids isn't providing a valid measure for us. So, because I needed to look at standardized assessments, so I was looking at FastBridge, and I was looking at the NWEA, because those are the only standard measures that we have that I can compare two unique groups to, and found out that our data around the NWEA was significantly inflated for our OVA students. And it really just highlighted both an opportunity and a challenge for us in that, recognizing that when students are learning in a remote environment, we don't control their engagement. You think about just from an assessment standpoint, we don't know the kind of assistance that they're getting. We don't know what are the resources they're using to take those assessments. So there's a lot of nuances to an uncontrolled atmosphere and how we do that. And so I think there's opportunities to look at how we assess kids. One of the things they did different this year was implementing the FMP assessment, and that is a one-on-one teacher-to-student assessment. So certainly very valid measure, but it's probably not sustainable across all the content areas, in that kind of a delivery model. So you talk, that's an opportunity, to think about how do we know where our kids are at and how can we help assist them. I think that's about more an instructional standpoint. How can we take what we're doing now and do that better? In terms of our seated kids and creating opportunities, and again, I think that there are certainly a lot of opportunities even through CTE, and not just our existing programs, but we have kids currently, where Lisa Butts has done an amazing job with that program, and we have kids in internships where she's the teacher of record, and they're working with other local businesses, through a program that we don't offer. And so, I think, and I know she's excited about looking at some of those opportunities to see if there are other partnerships and courses and things that we can provide for our kids. There's also opportunities for seated students to enroll in some of these virtual and partner programs. There's some conflict that exists from the standpoint that if our seated kids are taking virtual courses, they're not enrolled in other electives at the high school, right? So that's a conversation that we need to have as to the breadth and depth of what we might want those kids to take in those opportunities, but know that that has some consequences in other places. And so, we'll have to kind of vet those things against each other to figure out, what the best path is. But there are clearly a lot of opportunities to enhance what we're doing and create new innovative opportunities for kids.
Back to me. Considering the learning loss that has occurred over the past 2 years, what would you do to ensure our graduating seniors are ready for the rigors of post-secondary education, particularly as it relates to their reading, writing, and grammar skills?
So that's a good question. I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. Certainly when it comes to thinking about reading, writing, grammar, and our current seniors, we've got a limited amount of time, before they leave the district. And if we want to accelerate academic opportunities for kids, it comes down to engagement, engagement in that curriculum and content. And so, I know that right now we have teachers that we're paying for after-school supports for students. I don't know how we're identifying those kids to participate, but I think we need to look at, where our kids are at, or to address, I think specifically seniors. We've got a short period of time, so that would mean we need to hit the ground running in terms of identifying where our kids are at, what are those shortfalls, and do we need to make some investments in our existing teachers to be able to support kids beyond the regular school day. I think that's really where that time needs to take place, where we can enhance the amount of times the time that kids are engaged in that content area. But even beyond just our seniors, we know that even other classes are still in the same place. There's been missed opportunities over the last couple of years. Even though we've been in session and probably have done fared better than most, it hasn't been without consequence. There have been school closures, and even recently, having been closed for weeks. And so, that certainly has an impact. And so, we're going to need to look at where our kids are at, and they're all in different places. And that is one of the challenges I think that our teachers are feeling right now. Is there's a lot of differentiation in terms of student needs as a byproduct of the pandemic and certainly the recent tragedy. So. I think we need to take a deep look at that, and identify what our unique needs of our kids are. What are the academic shortcomings? If our kids are struggling in writing, are there particular areas of writing? You talk about grammar, syntax. Are there other areas that some of the kids that they might be assessing in the ELA department that we can focus on? Is it broadly writing or reading, or are there core areas within that we can focus on, and then be much more explicit in that kind of instruction? We need to create academic opportunities for kids after school that's going to focus on some of those key areas, so we can target what kids individually need. But that's all premised on the fact that we need to look at some of that local data to see where our kids are at, to be able to identify those needs. But I think those are just some opportunities. And certainly we have summer programming. I'd certainly be open to, we're going to open that up district-wide. And so, I don't see why we couldn't allow seniors to participate in some of that, to get some additional assistance over the summer.
Thank you very much. Mary?
What is your approach to dealing with discussions about potentially difficult topics such as race, religion, politics, sexual orientation, and gender identity? Can you please provide some specific examples?
I'm going to share maybe I'll start with a story, just to kind of share where my head is at around this issue. When I was in Troy, one of my colleagues in our central office staff, African American woman, had a great relationship. Both of her boys attended elementary school in the district, and she came to me to have a conversation one day because she knew I was an elementary principal, and I think I was a natural stop for her to say, hey, here's what's happened at my kid's school. I wanted to get your take on it. And And the situation was that, you know, there were two African American boys on the playground who there was some conflict that existed. And one of them was misbehaving, and the supervisor who was on the playground misidentified her son as, you know, this other boy, right? So gave him the wrong name, and, you know, called him the wrong name, and then it happened again, and, you know, and that employee, you know, I think just kind of laughed it off, you know, just didn't, you know, they, you know, couldn't, you know, didn't identify the students, and she was very offended, you know, by that, you know, this notion that, you know, the supervisor couldn't see that the kids looked different. And so I share that example because it's just a lens in, you know, us having the ability to have kind of a courageous conversation around sometimes some difficult areas that maybe I may not have even internalized the same way, or I've identified that was an area of concern. You know, because in her mind she was thinking that, you know, and she had articulated this to me, you know, do all black kids look the same? It was an interesting lens, you know, that I hadn't thought about. And so I share that example because when it comes to difficult topics, I think we need to have the courage to have the conversations, you know. We need to be able to bring those conversations in the room and understand each other. You know, this, I think it comes down to some of the work we did as a board, we started to do with Jay Marks and talk about cultural competence and how do we identify the unique needs of all of our kids that goes well beyond just ethnicity, but culturally, you know, differences, even among people of the same race, you know, and how everyone has different experiences. And so I think that transcends all areas, whether it's gender identity or, you know, sexual orientation or ethnicity. You know, I think that, you know, we need to be engaged in those conversations. I think we've made some inroads in that area. I think we've got a lot of work to do. You know, the district has formed a diversity council, which I think is a good first step to be able to, you know, bring in those conversations to the table to understand, you know, those unique needs. You know, and ultimately at the end of the day, this comes down to how do we make sure that every child is supported every single day, you know, regardless of their differences.
David, just so you know, timing-wise, we hit 20 minutes prior to Mary's question, so we're probably somewhere around 16. And we still have five more questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Mine's quick. What three characteristics best describe you?
Okay, three characteristics. I would say integrity would be first for me. I think just core to everything. I think relationships. If you haven't heard that before tonight, relationships are key to everything we do. You know, particularly in public education. You know, we can't advance the work that we do without having the right relationships in place. And then I would say, three. Dedicated. I'm dedicated, and I know that I will give this district everything I can if I'm the next superintendent. So, all right, catch it up on time now.
Yeah.
Okay, taking over. Teacher and staff retention and recruitment are going to be a challenge over the next several years. What specific ideas do you have to address this challenge? And how would that shape the collective bargaining process with all the employee groups?
We talked about some of this before. Certainly something, you know, near and dear to my heart. You know, I certainly recognize the shortage that exists. You know, so teacher and staff retention is incredibly important. You know, you talk about, you know, bargain. How does that inform the bargaining process? Well, I think that is part of the bargaining process. I think that is one of the ways that we make sure that we're retaining people is having competitive wages. And I'm not referring to just teachers. I mean, I think across the board, you know, we need to make sure that we're competitive, that we're valuing our people, and one of the ways that we show that value is how we compensate them. And so that it certainly will inform that process. I think part of it is also culture. You know, making sure that we have had an amazing culture in this district, And I know that people are struggling right now, and why that needs to be at the forefront. We need to maintain that culture in this district, and I will work diligently in that area, because that is going to be core to our success, is making sure that people, even in the most difficult of situations, want to be here and want to stay here. And so we've got to focus every effort we can, to make sure that we're creating that kind of environment. And again, attracting teachers, it comes down to advocating for the profession. We worked with some amazing individuals, and I said it before, teaching and education is the greatest profession on earth. No disrespect to all of your professions, but it's pretty amazing work that we do. And I think I will be the district's biggest cheerleader in that regard. We need, because if we can do that, and we can bring back the pride that people feel in doing their jobs, and being teachers and being educators, that's going to attract people to the profession. And so I want to be a cheerleader for what we do.
What protocols, activities, or strategies have you employed in leading meetings, both internally and externally, to ensure that everyone's voice is heard and valued?
I think that that's really important. I think it's very easy to allow certain individuals to always capitalize conversations. I think that that's true in a classroom, whether you're a student or even as an adult. I think there are some ways to do that. I mentioned before, I think, some of the work we did with Cultures of Thinking with Ron Richard and Troy, and there were a lot of protocols with that in terms of, how do you get kids to visibly think, and welcome all those voices into the room. And sometimes it's as simple, for some kids, as to turn and talk, right? You probably heard those strategies in the classroom, right? Well, there's intentionality about making sure that every child has a voice, that they're sharing their thinking. We do those same things with adults. I think there are facilitation strategies that I've used in the past that are very effective to making sure that everybody is participating, that everybody is providing input. Whether it's, we've done some protocols before where you might have an article to read at a table, and you've got each person at the table reading a different section, and then they teach each other what they've read. And so everybody's participating, and they might report out to the group, or having two individuals talk to each other about what they thought they wrote or read, or what they're thinking, and then share that with the group, and then report that out to to the whole group. So I think it really comes down to the right facilitation models and the topics of interest, to make sure that we're welcoming every voice into the room, and not allowing the more local people to capitalize on that, but that we're making sure we're hearing every voice. So.
Okay. Tell us how you would go about strengthening established partnerships between the schools and local businesses, industries, and community organizations, as well as creating new partnerships.
So of course you saw some of that in my 90-day plan, and certainly something I would tell you in my current role is not been a natural connection, but one that is very near and dear to me. We've got a lot of nonprofit groups, whether it's churches or other organizations that we can tap into for supports. We've got the Four Corners Community Foundation that wants to invest in some resources in the district, and so it's building those relationships with those community groups so that they can help support our students. I think about our CTE programs and having advisory boards, and I think that we can do more with those folks, and bringing those experts in, other than just our regular advisory meetings. We've got some access to some really great people. I talked a little bit about some of the stuff that we can do with OVA and enhancing more opportunities with some of our local businesses. I was just recently talking to Lisa Butts about, as our career-focused director, education director. She's got some great ideas about, bringing in career fairs, and some of those are parents, local leaders, and local professionals, and I know that that's something that she has been working towards and wanting to get off the ground, and I certainly would support her in those efforts. And I think there's opportunities for internships and looking at how we can tap into some of these local businesses, even through our career and technical education program. You know, we can certainly partner more and have kind of an independent study that, you know, we can have other people be the lead instructor for, but certainly tap into some of those local businesses. You know, I think that if nothing else, over the last couple months, we have seen the power of community engagement and what that can provide for a district. And so it would be very important for me to work towards, you know, continuing and enhancing those.
We have 9 minutes.
This probably won't be that, you've already touched on this in your presentation and a little bit in some of the other questions, but I'm wondering, so the board and the community value visibility of the superintendent in the school buildings, at events throughout the district and in the community. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about how you plan to be an active and visible member of the district, in the district and community as our superintendent.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I think I talked about that, right? That I think this will be a priority for me. You know, and that means attending district functions. You know, whether it's the upcoming musical or athletic events. You know, some of the things that might happen in our elementary buildings, and certainly, you know, being accessible, being available, and invested. You know, if I'm your superintendent, I'm going to invest in this community. You know, there's no more important role as a superintendent than bridging that gap between the community and our schools. I've said it before. I mean, strong communities make strong schools, and vice versa. And so it's going to be very important that I participate in those things, and not just district events. And I talked about building visits and really having some structural, you know, some structure to how I do that. But I talked about even the community partnerships, you know, looking at, you know, our township or the Chamber of Commerce and other ways that I can engage the community and look at what potential resources might be available. You know, how can we partner and enhance those things? So yeah, as I've mentioned before, I think that would be a very intentional approach for me.
Very good. We have about 6 or 7 minutes. The first thing would be to, if you have any questions for the board, and then save yourself some time for your last comments.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just ask one question. You know, we've talked a lot. I've certainly heard from myself, from the different stakeholder groups. What do you see as, you know, as an incoming superintendent in March? What do you see as, you know, from the board's perspective as some of the key priorities that you want to see day one? You know, that we hit the ground running with.
Heather?
I think you mentioned it. But communication. So I think we need to have somebody that has a strong, that is ready to plant their feet and communicate and try and keep us moving forward with our community, not just with the tragedy that happened, but just kind of we're at the tail end of the school year. So I think communication is a big key that seems to keep coming up every single board meeting, every single minute.
Anyone else? Dan?
Thanks. Just to kind of add to that, I think if you were to ask that question before the 30th, that perspective may be a little bit different. One of the things you touched upon is, and it goes into the communication part of it, but it also goes into the relationship building with the community. This is nobody has the recipe for how do you get back from a tragedy that we've all, not just the school community, but this entire community's had to endure. And the natural reaction is, after you go through all the grieving and everything, is to start to point this finger, that finger at everybody. That's going to be the major challenge. And that's going to be a focus that we have to be able to accept the challenge and have the difficult conversations and say, understand what we have to do, what we need to do as a district to move the district forward. And that's the thing that is paramount. Day one.
Thank you, Dan. Eric?
So for me, I would think the next superintendent would have to hit the ground running. It should feel like a transition that is seamless, right? Like everybody was kind of mentioning, you know, communication is key. I would not expect to have a lack of communication right off the board. You know, those things should keep happening right away, or even get better, right? Communication with our community involvement, we would expect, you know, job one, you know, day one, you're at events, you know, things like that are happening, and you know, we're seeing you at different things, you know, so kind of a very hands-on, you know, I've embraced the role, I'm doing all these things that I promised I would do from day one.
Thank you, Eric. Corey?
I think for me, seeing that passion, that drive, I mean, we say we want to be the best, we talk about TMO. I want to see the passion that proves to everybody we are, you know, getting our kids ready for college, getting them ready for trade school, or getting them ready just to go right into the career field, but getting them ready, but somebody who's got the passion and drive and says, everybody follow me, because I'm going to get you there.
Thank you, Corey. Anyone else? So your closing comments.
All right, well, again, I want to reiterate how appreciative I am to the board considering me for this position. I'm humbled, honored. I'm also under no illusion as to what I may be getting myself into. I know the challenges ahead, you know, and I will tell you that I'm a man of my word when I talk about integrity. What I put in that plan is going to happen. That is, I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. You will always be able to count on me for that, no matter what. And you know, from the moment that I had heard that, you know, Tim, you know, after having come to Oxford, quickly learned that, you know, Tim was planning to retire at the end of his contract. My first reaction was, "You're too young to retire," and I had no idea. But then it got me thinking, you know, like, okay, you know, is this something that I might aspire to do? And I think throughout my career, I've always tried to, I think I call it a passionate curiosity. I love, you know, I love a challenge. Certainly I'll get one if I'm your next superintendent. I know that. But I'm a learner. I have always been a learner, and I've never been afraid to try something new I've never done before, and I go into it with the attitude that I'll figure it out, and we'll figure it out. You know, I went back to obtain my doctorate degree because I knew that Tim had plans to retire, and I wanted to learn. I wanted to prepare as best I could if that was going to be a potential opportunity that I wanted to pursue. You know, I enrolled in this, you know, the Superintendent's Academy, you know, before I knew that he was planning to retire this fall, because I wanted to prepare myself the best I could. I know that if I were your next superintendent, I'm sure there might be a swift kick in the pants in terms of realization, but I still don't know. I recognize that every day, you know, when I look back at how much I've learned, you know, across the course of my career. You know, I prefer not to be the smartest person in the room, because I think there's great ideas and collective experience and knowledge to draw from. But I would boil it down to this for you. I'm all in. I'm all in for this community and for these kids. I'd be honored to be your next superintendent. I'm under no illusion of the challenge that we have ahead. But I think this district deserves it. Deserves, you know, good leadership. And I'm not saying I'm the choice. Would love to be the selected candidate. I know I'll give you everything I have to deliver on my promises and everything I can to support this community and these teachers and our kids to the best of my ability. And so I appreciate all of you. I appreciate the time and certainly the consideration. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, we sincerely appreciate your time and continued interest in being the next superintendent of Oxford Community Schools. We will continue to keep you appraised throughout the rest of our decision-making process and expect to be prepared to make our final determination on Friday, March 4th. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And we'll take just a short break and then transition back into our meeting. All right, fellow board members, we are on 3B on our agenda, and I've broken that up into two different categories. One is, as we faced most recently, there's the potential for weather to affect the evening meeting at least. It doesn't appear to be affecting the early part of the day, but it's supposed to be getting uglier, colder, and all sorts of things as we get towards the end of the day. And so I just want to talk about that and talk about the what ifs. So obviously, if we can make it, we're going to do it. So that's number one. And so the goal is to get it done. John's already going to be here doing the visits during the day, shareholder meetings. And so I think that's a given. He's already going to be here. So we would be calling it off because of just believing it's not safe. Because the candidate's already here, John's already here. So I think it's the what if. If we do have to move it, I understand that some of you can't be available on Friday. Chad, I think it was you, and Corey, you both told me that you travel.
I'm available Friday and Monday, and then I go out of town Tuesday.
Okay, so you're not available on Friday.
I am not available on Friday.
Okay, so given the fact that that's not available, and because of some things that you have, John, now you take over. Where are you at with your schedule and where we would go next on a date?
Well, I think it's going to have to depend more on you, and what I'm going to need to do is adjust and get some assistance. I unfortunately am a busy person these days, and I am booked every night next week, and I think well into the following week. So if it would be possible to flip things, well, I'm going to have to do one of two things. I either have to get a colleague to cover for me here, which certainly there would be no drop-off in the support you would get if that were the case. Or if it could work out that I could get a colleague to support me elsewhere and be here, I would do that. It would have to be one or the other. So I don't think whatever the plan will be should be dependent on my availability, because that's going to be a problem for me whatever night you choose. So honestly, if it's sooner the better, whatever night next week could work for the 7 of you.
So looking at early next week, you're gone through Looking at next week, you're gone through Monday or through when?
I leave Tuesday at noon and I come back Sunday morning.
Ooh, the whole week.
And if everybody's here, I really couldn't see why we couldn't do it tomorrow.
That's the goal. The goal is to do it tomorrow. I think it's just trying to have a plan for John if we face a what if. Dan?
Since we could possibly, and I don't have any idea when the snow's supposed to hit, I didn't even look at that.
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. What's the likelihood or probability that we could just flip things around?
Do it earlier, you mean?
Do it earlier. I mean, we could have our portion of it done, and if the other candidate needs to do the, do the site, go through the schools and meet all the shareholders, can they do that another day? Because now you're not having to fit 7 different people, 8 different people, plus the candidate's calendar into it. I mean, the people that they're going to talk to are traditionally in the building anyways. It's just the shareholders that are external, meaning parent groups or whomever.
So John, what is the possibility of either shortening that process so that we can meet earlier, or, as Dan said, even putting some of it at a different time?
Well, the really critical thing is that this is equitable, so that what we do for one candidate, we do for the other candidate, right? So where it gets really tricky is even splitting it, where you do, and I have given some thought to this very honestly. What if, or could we do this? I mean, it's not ideal in terms of compressing the schedule. Then I wouldn't want to, because that would be shortening the time with the stakeholder groups, and then you just don't have the equity that you need.
Clear.
So I don't know what you're speaking of in terms of how we would, when the board would meet. I know the soonest you could bring your stakeholder groups back together would be, what, Friday, if school was in session, even though that looks iffy too, or Wednesday,
Right.
because there's no school Monday or Tuesday.
No school Monday or Tuesday.
Right.
I mean, in all reality, it's not going to start till 3. I guess I haven't looked at I haven't looked at the weather. No, I'm just saying that I haven't looked at, I mean,
We can't change the time of our meeting tomorrow. We can't move up the board meeting, the special board meeting. It's already posted.
Due to the public notice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can't change that.
All right.
We need 18 hours, but
so you would still need 18 hours to cancel it.
no,
To cancel.
I need 18 hours
To post
Change.
it.
to post the
Yeah, there's
change.
an 18
Post
hour
it
requirement
publicly.
to
She
post.
needs 18
Right.
hours to post it publicly.
But not to
So we
cancel.
can cancel.
But not to cancel, especially due to
Yeah.
safety.
All right, so I think it sounds like we do everything we can to try to make it happen tomorrow, with everybody being here.
You know, I'll be here and Ken will be here, so.
Would it be
it's
easy
a
if
seven
they just
to
had
do
that
that.
central office so that, or they're going to be?
They're here.
Everybody's gonna be here.
Anyways, okay.
That's why we're in the media center, because he's here all day in PAC.
Okay.
Really, the
Just
only
have to drive
concern is
careful
how far
and
you have
cross
to
our
drive.
fingers.
I live in Rochester. Don't be concerned about that. I appreciate it. I do. But if you folks can get here, my strong preference would be to get this done tomorrow and stay on schedule.
Yeah,
It
me
really
too.
would be. So if we can pull it off, I'll drive slowly and carefully back home to Rochester through the snow. That's fine. I'll be fine. I lived in Michigan my whole life. It's nothing new.
Yep.
I
All right.
think it is gonna snow all day, but
Corey
I
will
think
give me a ride if I.
Yeah.
Dangerous Corey.
Keep our fingers crossed and just all drive carefully and get here and then just do it.
Sounds good. All right, we will focus on getting it done tomorrow. All right, site visits. There was some, not only was there some question on who could be attending, because who's on the original committee? Mary, Heather, and was it Corey?
Yes.
All right, Corey, but now your schedule's
Now
affected
I'm going
because
out of
of going out of town. All right,
Chad, the alternate?
Check.
So I have a question. Oh, sorry.
oh, go ahead.
And I guess it's for John. I just want to be clear on what the goal is for holding site visits. And is it common when you only have internal candidates to hold site visits?
The goal is it's one more piece of information to help you make a significant decision, right? You want to have as much information as possible, get from any perspective, but you can't look at it from all angles. So having the opportunity to interact with people that your final candidates work with and for, to directly ask them questions, hear their responses, and be able to see if that provides any differentiation between the two finalists. That's the purpose, right? It just helps you differentiate, make that final decision. It's more information than you have going into it. In terms of how does this work when you have two finalists from the same district? Personally, I wouldn't know because this is the first time I've come across this. I have never experienced this before. So I certainly can imagine it could be a little bit challenging for the participants. There is going to be some, it doesn't have to be 100%, it probably wouldn't be, but there's going to be some folks who would be asked by both of your finalists, I'm quite sure, to participate. So you'd have people speaking on behalf of both. So it puts them in a little bit of an awkward position potentially, right? It's difficult to speak to. You know, I'm a big proponent of site visits overall. I think that again, and I say this not so much because it's my personal opinion, but because of the feedback I've gotten from board members time and time again in the past who've done it. And there have been times where it's been an external and an internal. again, this is unique because it's never been too internal. So how that impacts this and how that impacts the quality of it is, for me, almost impossible to predict, right? But fundamentally, typically, I just believe there is a lot of value in it. I hope that answers your question.
It does, it does.
I have a question for John too.
Yes,
And-
please.
And then some comments.
Sure.
Do you prepare things for us to discuss with them, or is it more of a free dialogue?
I would provide you with what I would just consider sample questions, examples.
Outline?
Not even an outline. I have a list of maybe somewhere between 15 and 20 questions. I don't remember exactly. That just are.
White binder here.
I have actually developed some additional ones. There are a few in there. Honestly, I wasn't satisfied with those. Those are what our company puts out. I've created my own. So I have my own list that I'm going to be submitting to you. And those are kind of a take it or leave it list, right?
Okay.
You could do some, all, or none of those questions. You have the opportunity to ask questions, and you can select questions that perhaps your stakeholders have submitted to you, things that they're still wondering about. If there are any uncertainties about the candidates, things that you're still a little bit iffy on, things that you just would like to dive a little bit deeper on, it's really an opportunity for you, wherever there may be gaps or wherever there just may be difficult to differentiate between the two candidates. This is an opportunity to have you ask those questions, pointed questions that kind of hit in those areas. And again, the goal comes back to helping you differentiate between two strong final candidates. So that really is the structure. You have a lot of latitude in how you approach it. So I'll give you some help with those questions, but you can take it from there.
Okay, and then I wanted to make some comments about it. I know that there was some talk of whether or not we would eliminate the site visits or whatever, but I just kind of wanted to, I guess, go on record, if you will. I think that our process was set up by John, and we all discussed it and verified it multiple times, and said that this is the process that we were going to do, and to go back on that process is not being transparent to what we told our community and our constituents that our process was going to be. And I'm not okay with that. And when we say we're going to adopt a process, we should. And I think that the purpose and goal of this site visit not only is value add from a recruiting standpoint, it's an actual reference check. So to not do that would not be doing our due diligence. And I'm also not okay with that. I just think it could be a very positive experience. So to eliminate it or not include it would.
The only thing with me that puts a question mark into it, the only thing is because it is unique that you have two internal candidates and that you would have an overlap in terms of participants.
Right.
To me, that's the only reason it becomes a question, right? So to whatever extent that's a factor in your thinking, I just want to point that out. I think if not for that, I'm not sure we'd even be having the discussion.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Dan.
As I get a little older, sometimes I forget the last process that I was on with when we had two candidates. I wasn't one of the three people that went on the site visits, and I can't honestly remember if we did an internal with Tim. But I do remember some things. I do remember a lot of people saying, why would you even consider somebody that doesn't have classroom experience? Why would you even consider somebody that's never been principal? Why would you ever consider that opportunity that the board had to see the heart in a person was through that process? And I think it played off pretty well. And I think if we go back on our process now, we might miss something that could be as beneficial to this superintendent as it was to that one. So I don't know that there's the right answer, because I know that there's a lot of people that have a lot on their plates. But as we're talking about if we move this, and we move that, and everything moves, we all have a lot on our plates too, but we've got to do our thing. This is the one thing that we've been hired to do, voted in to do. Select the superintendent, set policy. Now we just say, we got to follow our plan all the way out, and it's not easy on any of us, and I'm sure it's not easy on anybody else. But we got to follow the process.
Anyone else?
How do the candidates feel about this? Because again, being unique, I mean, basically what you're doing is you're asking people to say, I'm on Camp A or Camp B, and if I'm on Camp B and Camp A is picked, it's not going to look good for me.
Sure, that's what could create angst, but what I would suggest for participating board members is the most critical thing for you would be not in any way, shape, or form to phrase a question that would lead to somebody having to answer in that way. So it's not asking leading questions to infer, well, do you prefer, which of the two internal candidates do you prefer? It's just, again, to talk about their relationship with the candidates, their experience with the candidates, how they view the candidates' relative strengths, how they, if there are specific questions about particular experiences, what has been their experience, what have they observed, etc. It's more those types of questions. What you don't want to at all get into is putting people in a position ever where they have to say, because you're totally right, that would be an awful position to be in, is right to have to weigh in on which of these two internal candidates would I recommend. That's a no-win kind of a position for them to be in. So you have to be cautious not to phrase any questions that might lead them there.
Is it private? Will we be able to speak with them privately, or is it
Well,
is it in front of the candidates?
No, the candidates are not part of it.
Okay.
I had sent you if you hadn't had a chance to look, the email, you got the instructions that the candidates had received. And so they can be there to greet you, they can be there at the very end, otherwise they're not there. They can have somebody there on their behalf just to keep things moving and keep it on time, etc. It's where it's really not private, I suppose, is that you're meeting with a group, right? And so however many people are in that group, they're all hearing the dialogue. And in some cases, some of them are going to be hearing the dialogue that you have on both candidates, right? So it would be hard to characterize it as being private in that way.
Right. Thank you.
One other thought.
Yes, sir.
So today you had all the shareholders, stakeholders involved discussing data. And tomorrow we'll be doing the same thing with Ken. So you've heard from all this, the people. You had the opportunity to hear from all of them about the district. And that's great. That's what we should be doing. But then the 7 people that have to make a decision aren't hearing any of that information. It could be very bad. So I just think we just need to think about that. Whatever the board decides, we're going to go in that direction, but I think we just need to decide and move in that direction, whatever is the will of the board, and we'll just go from there.
Do we get feedback? We get forms, we get feedback, right, from the meetings, the stakeholder meetings?
Angela's going to be putting those in your hands now, and just know that, Angela can vouch for this. Whereas here at the board meetings, we put forms out and call people's attention to them. At these meetings, when they walk in, I'm handing these forms to them. The opening comments that I make, I specifically tell them that you have been asked not to be present, but that because of that, this does you no good and doesn't help your decision making unless they provide this feedback to you. And given that, I don't think anybody walked out of there without handing off a form. I promise them that the candidates won't see it, you're going to. So you're getting quite a bit of feedback from the day today.
That's good.
Yeah, it is.
I just had a couple more
Yes.
procedural questions now about the site visits. So on the sheet that you had first provided, there's student groups parent and community members and faculty and staff. This also has board members, but that wouldn't be applicable
Right,
here
in this
because
case.
we can already talk to each other. Are we suggested to use, since this is more of a Q&A, are we suggested to use the same questions for both of the candidates, or is it going to be whatever might come up we want to ask a question about? And are you there?
This is the one part of the process, and this is our standard protocol. I'm not present for this, so you have the opportunity, but just be you and these various stakeholders.
So we also need to be sure that we are asking questions and not making any comments.
I would say so. You're just looking to gather information and hear their perspectives, and it's not about you making any kind of
It's not.
commentary. Right. It wouldn't be appropriate. You're totally right about that.
So about the questions, I'm sorry. So is it suggested that we use the same questions for both candidates?
I think I think in a lot of cases you would probably want to, because you're really trying to draw a distinction between the two. And so if you're asking similar questions based on the responses, I think that would be more helpful than anything in helping you identify those differences. But it could be it's a little bit more free-flowing, because a response to a question might generate a follow-up question, so that could provide some variance. And just as I had indicated to you that in the second round interview, had you chosen to, you could have asked one or two, maybe up to three kind of specific questions of each of the candidates. So I think even in these site visits, it would be okay if there's some variance there too. I can't imagine that it would be beneficial if they were wildly different and totally right. I know that's not what you're asking. So the suggestion, since that really is what you're asking, is that for the most part, you're asking very similar questions without being concerned if there was some variance to it.
And board members, for some clarification, the reason why this topic's even come up is because today Jim Gibbons reached out to me as the head of the teachers union and stated some concern on behalf of those he represents and those that he's been talking with. My next call was to John, letting him know that I had that conversation, and a suggestion to John out of that conversation that I would send all of you an email so that you would be notified, because I think that's my job, is to notify you when things like that take place. So as one of our board members depicts that as unprofessional, I believe it is exactly what I'm supposed to do. My goal was not to manipulate the process, as one of our board members stated, but it's to make sure that you're fully engaged and understand. It's your decision. And it's the most important decision, and it's what we're called to do. We also represent those people who vote for us. One of the largest groups is a teachers union. So listening and hearing is just something that I think we need to do, and I just wanted to provide you information. So the accusation of unprofessionalism and the accusation that with Jim Gibbons I'm manipulating a process is not tolerated. So with that, you decide what you're going to do.
I can just add one thing too, if it would be helpful, that one of the things I could do in addition, assuming you would decide to go forward with the site visits, would be to let both of the candidates know that they may want to be sensitive to the fact that, especially as it relates to teachers, just as they ask for folks who they would like to have participate, that they don't push too hard on that, that they make sure that these folks are willing and able, and they don't feel like there's any undue pressure. In other words, you know, this is an administrator in the district, and I don't dare say no. I wouldn't want anybody to feel that way. So I can coach them in that regard to make sure they understand that they want to tread lightly. And if they ask folks to participate on their behalf, that they make clear that it's totally fine if they just feel like they're not in a position where they're comfortable with that, or they just choose not to. So that they would rely only on those folks who feel comfortable with it.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for that, John. Actually, you touched on kind of where I was going. So the idea of the site visit is to give us exposure to multiple professional disciplines, right? Teachers, paras.
Not necessarily just professionals. This you know, I give the candidates the opportunity to select from groups of various stakeholders. They could include parents, for example. They could include community members, right? It's totally their choice. I give them examples.
Okay, perfect. So what I was thinking is and you touched on it, right? If you're invited, you're not necessarily required
No.
to be there. If you've got other obligations, you can't make it. But if a number of folks are not able to make it, we still probably have some value in talking to whomever is able to be there, right?
Well, I'll just go back to, I always think, I think there is value in the site visits. I do. There is that wild card, same two candidates from the same district, but fundamentally, yes, I do. I think that site visits are worthwhile. But again, in this case, I would gladly stress with both of the candidates, given that there could be that, especially if there are people who they may both be asking, just to make sure that they're kind of gentle about it in that way, and if people are at all uncomfortable with it, let them know that that's okay, and they would ask others instead.
And they select who they invite to this.
They do. They do.
So if the teachers are not comfortable, then they just wouldn't be part of it.
Yes, but again, what I would want to do is make sure that they are crystal clear with these folks so that they understand that it's okay to say no.
Sure.
That may be implied, but again, if you're asking a subordinate to participate on your behalf, right? I think it's probably better to be crystal clear about that and be very upfront, and so I would coach both of them to do that.
Your leanings? I'm hearing that the leaning is to continue with the process and move forward.
Valuable tool.
All right.
I don't see any reason to change it.
So if I can add to that, what I would like to do then, because I'd like to get the candidates, even though I've given them some direction to start kind of conceptualizing what this is going to look like and start getting their thoughts together and who they might approach, etc. The sooner I can give them a specific day and time frame, I think the better, because they can literally then start reaching out to people and getting it scheduled. So we had scheduled this for next week. Monday and Tuesday would be out because there's no school in session. It just wouldn't work. If you recall, we talked about this being during the course of the school day, roughly from like 9 to 4. I've advised the candidates they're looking at about no more than 3.5 hours. So the participants are able to give me, I would need which 2 dates out of those 3, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, would work for you, and which time block within that 9 to 4 time period, 3.5 hour time block would work. So, for example, if you said, well, Wednesday is one of those days, and the best time for us would be 10 to 12:30, great. Give me the second day, same thing, and then I would just simply assign one of those to each of the candidates and allow them to start preparing for it. So I don't know if you know that now, or if you can talk about it now, or if not, maybe just even right after the meeting, it would be fine too, and if you can let me know, I can communicate that to the candidates.
We did start chatting about it, just looking at dates.
Okay.
In preparation for here. But then Corey was going to be out of town.
Yeah,
So
that changed.
then we're back to Chad, so then we're back to Chad. So anyway, and I know Heather and I talked about Wednesday, and Corey too, until he had to go out of town. So we can talk afterwards if it's better, but we had started some discussion. We'll just talk quickly after the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, is that okay, Heather?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
very helpful.
Yeah, because I think we all want to put it on our calendars.
Yep.
Fantastic, I appreciate it.
Okay. If we have to go to our second alternate, then we will, because that's what we do in Oxford, we get it done.
All right, we move to number 4, unscheduled audience participation. Mr. Gibbons.
So, I was not planning on talking to you tonight, but I want to make clear that you know why I made the call to Tom, and make sure you understand that I was reaching out as an employee who's gonna, I'm sure, be asked to be on both stakeholder meetings, along with several other employees. I told Tom when I talked to him this morning that I think that the last week has been, for the employees, at least in this building, the most stressful week since December 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. I don't think that's going to change over the course of the next week. And I said to Tom, this was not about an employee feeling uncomfortable about saying no. This is that every employee that's asked by Dave or Ken is going to want to participate. They're not feeling comfortable about saying, or uncomfortable about saying no. They're all going to say yes. But that means that 2 days next week, I'm going to be pulled out of what I'm supposed to be doing representing teachers. Teachers are going to be pulled out of their classroom. Central office administrators are going to be pulled out of doing what they're supposed to be doing. Building administrators are going to be pulled out of doing what they're supposed to be doing. Twice. Because Dave and Ken are going to ask a lot of the same people amongst our employee groups. What I can tell you from an employee perspective is we need to be doing our jobs. In our jobs. The site visit, I agree with John, those are important. You're hearing from employees, you're hearing from the people that are giving you feedback are people that work with Ken and Dave. They're the people who have been at the interviews. They were the people that were at the stakeholder meetings. You're getting the feedback from a lot of the people who that are going to be asked to be as part of the site visits. And I said to Tom, I think that because it's 2 internal candidates, you're going to have fairly neutral responses because it is a group, it's not a private session. I don't know how much you're going to glean from those visits to warrant pulling people out of what they're supposed to be doing next Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. To potentially make an awkward situation in an incredibly stressful time that our administrators and our teachers are going through. And that's why I took that to Tom. It was not to subvert the process or to hijack the process. It was to protect all of the employees from having to do something that I don't know has the value that it would if we had an internal versus an external team. So I want to make sure you understand that. And understand that the sacrifice that the people who are going to be asked to do this, who are your employees, who don't feel completely heard right now, and somebody representing them came to the president of the board to say that, and once again, our request wasn't honored. So that's why I did that. Just want to make sure that you're clear as to why that request was made this morning.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay. All right, we have a list of scheduled activities. There's nothing under clarification. Final board comments? Dan.
Thank you. I'm not sure how I want to put this, so I'm just going to say it because that's just the way it just has to be done. Jim asked the teachers and the union folks that he represents don't feel heard. We're giving them the opportunity to be heard. We're at a double-edged sword here. I understand it's stressful times. It is tough, but we have to make a decision on two really good candidates. And while I don't want to put any more pressure or any more undue influence on people that I know are very, very stressed, I wish we didn't have to do it, but we're in this position and we have to do the job. The second part of what I wanted to bring to the board's attention is we've had 2 meetings with outside source to have our search. We need to escalate this thing really fast. Because as you can see, everybody's nervous. Everybody has a level of angst. We need to take some leadership. We need to appoint somebody. We need to hire somebody. And we need to get it done now. We have a third one, I think, when is it? Tomorrow? Whenever that third one is, we need to move quick. We can't wait for what the attorney says. I think we heard pretty loud and strong from 2 of our candidates. That doesn't matter. They interact with that person, and it doesn't involve an investigation. It just starts the process to start happening. This is a stressful time for everybody, and we need to act accordingly, and we need to act swiftly.
Thank you. Heather?
So I want to, I guess, a little bit stand up for myself. That was me who sent Tom the email. And so I owe you an apology for saying manipulate, because that was not the appropriate word. And thinking about that and hearing what you had to say, I wanted to apologize.
Thank you.
But I meant it from a standpoint of manipulate is more controlling and handling of things. What I don't want to happen is I don't want our processes to be missed, and I don't want us to not be doing the job that the board is really in charge of. And that is our big job right now is to find the best superintendent that we can, and that is to follow the processes that we've all agreed upon following. And we've discussed it multiple times, and the internal versus internal, and many things have kind of come up on multiple different times, and that's where that came from. And I did hear what you had to say, Jim, but I hope that the teachers know that, this is our job as board members, just like their job is teaching kids, and we're not supposed to tell them how to do that. We need to be entrusted to do our job as well. So that's it.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, I don't have anything under other. Oh, please. I'm sorry, I missed you.
No, that's okay. We hadn't talked about it prior, but I think so. Just taking off from what Dan was saying. So Eric, Dan, and I, we have begun meeting with consultant firms. We've discussed the third-party review, so those discussions are coming in. Just to reiterate the point that Dan was making, we had in prior conversations. We talked about, we'll just say taking a little bit of time to be diligent about not interfering with litigation and other legal proceedings, right? The message that we're getting from both of the consultants that we spoke with this week is that now is the time to begin the process, right? Because there are steps that need to be taken, there are conversations that need to be had, discussions with stakeholders, parents, students, teachers, whatever the case may be, right? But now's the time to really start looking at that, making sure that, there's ways to go about this to get the process going without tripping on any of our legal concerns. Right, which, yeah, so Michigan and Michigan State both used a process like this. And refresh my memory though, yeah, please.
Go ahead, you finish, and then I'll bring them up to speed.
Well, no, now's a good time. Go ahead and jump.
Because that's a very, very good point, because what the one consultant said was, he's a Spartan, and he said, I'm just really proud that Michigan State, or Michigan hired Spartan to investigate their situation that they have, and a couple different things. But what they did differently in the two universities really set them apart from a perspective of not only their alumni base, but their current students and everybody. Michigan went at it right off the bat and said, this is what we're going to do. And it may not be resolved yet, but they went at it right off the bat, whereas Michigan State just kind of let it go, let it fester, let it fester, let it fester. And all of a sudden, the narrative is whatever anybody wants it to be, because nobody was in charge of it. And so that's what I got out of it. It's kind of what I heard, and Eric's got his hand up, so he may have heard something different. I just want you all to know that that's what we're kind of dealing with here.
Yes.
So we need to stop. This is not the time or place to have this discussion. We haven't reviewed the materials from either of them fully. So before we go on and talk about what they will or will not do, or when they will or will not do it, we need to get both packets. We have a third company to still talk to. We should not be having this discussion now. This is not the time and place. We haven't even talked to our fellow board members yet. So I think we need to table this discussion until all the data is available and have an informed conversation. Right?
Fine, but I think we need to speed that process up.
Okay, but again, we need to have that discussion first. We need to talk to the third company. We need to, of course, run this through the attorney, because that's what we should do.
Absolutely.
And then make a decision, okay? That's just how I feel.
Thank you. Chad?
Okay, so let me just tie that up then. The plan is, we've got one more that we are meeting with soon. We'll pull all of our notes together, as well as all of the detailed materials that we've collected from these consultants, and we will provide that to everybody, to all of the board members, so we can have some discussion. At that point, we'll figure out who we go with, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Create an agenda item on a future meeting.
Right.
All right. Mary, did you have your hand up earlier for this subject or a different one?
Under other,
Okay, please.
are we on other?
Are we on other?
Yes.
I mean, anything on that subject?
Kind of my
We're good.
Okay. I had spoken with Tom previously about setting up our new superintendent for success. And it's really important for our district and for us as a board to be sure that goals are communicated clearly, that we are familiar with the superintendent evaluation tool, that we are clear about our requests, and that we are working together as a board. The MASB offers a lot of tools to that end, and I just wanted to bring up for everybody to start thinking about a little bit. Maybe we can talk tomorrow or talk next week about what kind of training we as a board, or as the board and the superintendent, want to do, whether it's MASB, that's the tools I'm familiar with, or somebody else, but to do a board self-evaluation, to have MASB back out again when we have our new superintendent, talking about defining those roles and what the board does and what the superintendent does. They have specialized trainings that they can do for us, like if we do the board self-evaluation and we see that there's some places that we have for growth and development, we can do some specialized trainings around that. So the superintendent evaluation tool, I think it's important to go over that again with the new superintendent. So we all start out on the same page and we all have the same expectations and everything is clearly articulated back and forth. And I think the MASB, again, offers some great tools to do that. So I'd love to have a further discussion about that tomorrow, next week, but I think that's really important too. that we're ready for a new superintendent also.
Mary, would you be willing to contact someone at MESB? Because we were right.
Sure.
We're going to know more about maybe the superintendent review than either one of these guys who hasn't gone through one, right?
Right.
So maybe think of 3 to 5, 4 to 6 things that they would offer us, and even in what order would they want to offer them
Okay.
for a brand new superintendent and a board, and maybe not tomorrow, but the next meeting we have next week,
Mhm.
the next week that we could have that as a part of an agenda item and have a discussion. Maybe not make a decision that day, but we got to make one, if not then, the meeting in March. So would you look up some offerings?
I certainly will.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Anything else under other? Seeing none, meeting is adjourned. Great day to be a Wildcat.